Okay, thank you all for coming to my presentation about my action research project that I did. As you know, I've been working on my master's, and this was the culminating project for that master's experience. The topic, as you can see, is TPRS in the elementary classroom. Does it work? I'll get into more detail about TPRS itself and all of that information. Here it is. So the reason I chose to do this as an action research project is, you'll see these are some references that I used in the paper, 3 pages of references, and none of them had done, I couldn't find any research previous about TPRS being used in the elementary setting. So I'm in a unique position here to be able to meet the kids every day and to try and use TPRS to see there's a lot of success being shown in the middle school, high school, university level, and with adults using TPRS. But I couldn't find any research actually about elementary, so I just wanted to show you all those references that did not include any elementary research. So the focus of the research, the primary focus, was which method is more effective, TPRS or the Harkins method, which is how I dubbed the teaching style that I've been using, and again I'll go into more detail about that in a moment. There were 3 subpoints included within this primary focus: written abilities, oral speaking ability, listening and speaking ability, as well as student satisfaction. Language acquisition is very important to have. Low student anxiety levels is a very effective way to acquire the language. And so the student satisfaction piece, which I'll talk about in a little bit, is a part of the focus of this research. So TPRS, what is TPRS? It's teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. It's developed by Blaine Ray, who's a Spanish teacher. He was a Spanish teacher in California. He'd been teaching Spanish for years. He was using TPR, which a lot of you are probably familiar with, total physical response. It can be used for a lot of different things, including language acquisition. It's essentially giving some sort of spoken command, and the student reacts to it in some way, like, pick that book up, and he picks up the book. Physical response, you're getting your body involved. What he did was he changed it from total physical response, and it went through a few changes. Total physical response storytelling, and he completely changed the name, kept the acronym the same, but changed the name to teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. And the storytelling and the reading are the 2 main components of this TPRS, and that's what we'll talk about, or I'll talk about that in a moment as well. The main influence of the TPRS method is Stephen Krashen's theories, which is summarized mainly with the natural approach, meaning people learn languages in natural ways all the time. Little kids are learning languages every day. All your children learn languages. My children are learning languages. They're learning at least one language. And it's the natural approach. It's just engage them, make them motivated and interested in learning what you're talking about and acquiring the language that way, and not teaching grammar rules and vocabulary lists and things like that. It's more of a natural way to learn. TPRS focuses on comprehensible input. That's the main thing that it talks about. You know, you can hear somebody speaking a different language for hours on end, and if you don't know what they're saying, you're not going to acquire language that way. If it's not understandable in some way to you, it's not going to get in. You're not going to acquire it in any meaningful way. So it's comprehensible input, meaning small chunks of information used multiple times, and that's the way that the students will acquire the language. In the class, we create stories, and then the teacher circles information in that story. That's another very important part. Like I said, many repetitions, hearing the language, the input coming in needs to be comprehensible. So if the story was Johnny has a blue dog, what they call it's called circling story. So you say, Johnny has a blue dog. Who has a blue dog? Does Susie have a blue dog? No. Does Bobby have a blue dog? No. Does Johnny have a red dog? No. Does Johnny have a yellow dog? No. Johnny has a blue dog. And just by saying it over and over again and being silly with it and letting the students create the story as you go along, it makes the input comprehensible to them. HMLA is sort of the half-joking name that, I don't know if it was Mr. Dano's or Ms. Burns' kids came up with that. I told them it was the Harkins method, and they said it needed a catchier name to it. So Harkins method of language acquisition, developed by me, and it is most closely related to the official theoretical language instruction method would be communicative language teaching, which really is, it uses the language to teach the language. The theory there being you have to use the language in order to teach it, which is different from TPRS, which talks all about comprehensible input. You just keep feeding the information in, and eventually the output will start coming. And the Harkins method is a culmination of years of me adjusting practices based on, well, student achievement is what it was based on. If this worked, then I would keep it. If I tried something and it didn't work, I wouldn't keep it. Activities from the textbooks, activities from other teachers, activities that I came up with, just kind of changing and adjusting over years and years and years. When I came here to the elementary level, I changed a lot of what I was doing and kept some things and changed some things. And so that's what the Harkins method is. It was a lot of using language, more of the output, encouraging output at an early level before any kind of, or as opposed to just more of the input. And let me just say, if you guys have questions about anything, please feel free to ask. I meant to say that earlier. So the research itself was conducted with pre and post assessments. I gave the students a test, a written test and an oral test, and then instructed them. 2 separate classes, so Mr. Dano's class and Ms. Burns' class, one was getting the Harkins method, one was getting the TPRS method, and then I gave them a pre and a post assessment afterwards. And the question was, which one will show that students grew more during the instruction? The target phrases, which is a major tenet of TPRS, you always want to have, these are those chunks of comprehensible input that I was using over and over and over again. That part of the Harkins method always had some, usually vocabulary phrases, and they would tie in some of these target phrases. But I focused on these primarily because TPRS uses 3 to 4 target phrases each unit, and these were the 4 that I went through. Doesn't particularly matter, but that was, just wanted to put that out there. The results. So now we'll get into some of the data, which you guys have charts for if you can't see up here very well, I'm not sure. So following results show the data from the pre and the post tests. Students read a story and answered questions in written form and in oral form. So I gave them the story, and then I said, please answer these questions. I called them out into the hallway one by one, and I asked them the same questions just orally as opposed to seeing them written. How effective was that? We'll talk about later in the limitations and challenges section of the presentation, but that was the research that I developed, and that's what I did. So there were 4 questions in both the written and the oral, so the best possible score was a 4. So this was the Harkins method class, the written test. So they read the story and then they read the answers, and these were the results. So just some of the key things that I highlighted. 2 students, you can see F and L, got 0s on the pre-test and the post-test. So there's showing no bar at all for their results because they got 0s. 4 students scored 0 on the pre-test. So if you only see a black bar, that means there is no data at all for the pretest because they scored a 0. And then at least, so there were 4 of them that scored a 0, but then at least got a 1, at least one answer right on the post-test. And one student, where was that? G. Yeah, G got a 0 and then moved up and got a 4, a perfect score on the post-test. Student J scored a 4 on both the pre and the post-test, which again, we'll talk about later in the limitations and challenges, shows no growth at all for that student. And student D took the pre-test and got a 3, then I instructed he or she, and they got a 1 on the post-test after the instruction, which was not something that I would expect to happen, but it did. It's completely unexpected. And
so D, if you didn't do anything, you would have done a better job.
Exactly. If I had just let D move along with D's own, skills there, that would have been fine. And then I ruined D for this unit. And then other results varied, but essentially there was growth for the rest of the people. This is sticking again with the Harkins method class. This is the oral section. 2 students again, the same 2 students scored 0, student F and student L. Stuck with the 0s for the pre-test and the post-test. Student G scored a 0 on the pre-test and a 4 on the post-test, so again showing a lot of growth. Student D scored the same, students B and D got 2s on it. There's my student D again. Got a 2 on the pre-test and a 2 on the post-test, not showing any growth at all. And again, other results varied, but generally showed growth of one form or another. Any questions about either of these? All right, now moving over to the TPRS class. The written, so we had 3 students that scored a 4 on both the pre and the post test. So A, D, and G, before any instruction, already scored 4s and got perfect scores on them. There were 9 students that got 0s and then scored at least a 1, with student J going from a 0 to a 4 from the pre-test to the post-test. Student C.
Good to see you.
All right. So after some technical difficulties, here we're back. So just backtracking a little bit. 3 students scored a 4 on the pre and the post. 9 students scored a 0 on the pre-test and at least a 1 on the post-test. And with student J going from a 0 to a 4. Student C dropped in score after the instructions, so got a 3 or 4 on the pre-test and then ended up with a 3 on the post-test. Otherwise, they're varied with different levels of growth throughout. And then the oral test for the TPRS class, 2 students got a 2 on both the pre and the post-test, showed no growth at all. 4 students scored a 0 and then at least a 1 on the post-test. So starting with H, I, L, and N, these 1, 2, 3, 4 students had no data at all, so they scored a 0 on the pre-test. And otherwise, there was generally growth throughout with 4 students ending up with a 4 on the post-test. So this is really the big graph. This is the main results. What was I looking for? Which class will show more growth after instruction? So as you can see, the Harkins method for both the written and the oral showed more growth, which was completely not what I thought was going to happen. I was here to research TPRS and how effective TPRS was, and I expected TPRS to do better, and then the Harkins method class ended up doing better. Not necessarily by much. From the written Harkins method written to the TPRS method written, 0.47 points, so like a half an answer better they grew. And on the other one, it's just 0.09 points of growth, so less than 1 answer of growth. However, overall, when you look at all the data, it did show that the Harkins method class did better. We'll talk about that again in a minute. This was the student satisfaction survey results, which I, along with a lot of other instructors in general and language instructors, really place a lot of value in the comfort level of the students, the engagement of the students, how kind of personally satisfied they felt with a unit of instruction. And these were the questions that were on there. So the first one, I liked the way he taught, Senior Harkins taught this unit. It was out of a 3. A 3 was the best score they could get. So the TPRS class was just about a 3 with everybody, and the Harkins method class was a 2.5, 2.5. So very good, high averages for both methods of instruction. Question 2, I had fun during this unit. Again, very high scores for both of those, which is a very positive thing for me. I want the students having fun. I want them being engaged and feeling happy about when I walk in the door. I don't want them thinking, oh, here we go again. I want them thinking, all right, we're going to do something engaging and fun. Number 3, I think that I can speak Spanish better now. Showed the Harkins method with more growth, which makes sense if you remember the Harkins method uses the language to acquire the language. So they did more speaking practice in the Harkins method class than we did in the TPRS class. The TPRS class is all about comprehensible input and bringing more and more information into your head and then getting output at a later time. So it makes sense that question 3 showed more student satisfaction with the Harkins method when they were able to practice more speaking than with the TPRS method. I think I can read Spanish better now than before. As you can see, that's the lowest one, the lowest scores, just around a 2 for both the Harkins and TPRS methods. And that makes sense. We didn't do a lot of reading practice for those methods. We did a little bit more in the Harkins method class, which shows a little bit more growth. And then again, question 5, kind of relating back to question 3, I think I can understand when people speak better now than before we did this unit. It makes sense again that the TPRS class had more satisfaction with that. They were getting more and more input. It was me a lot more in the front of the class doing that circling, speaking, and giving them the input, which promotes more achievement in the listening comprehension areas. And then overall, you can see they both averaged decent scores, 2.5 out of 3, and then 2.4-ish out of a 3 for the Harkins method class. But this did show that the TPRS class edged out the Harkins method class in student satisfaction. So some of the limitations and challenges, and there were a lot to this research. So time was a big one. I had a 3-week window when I could do the research. One of those weeks was our February break. There were snow days, of course. I had sick children, and there were sick children between the 2 classes. So some students just got eliminated from the research because they missed a certain amount of days of instruction. If they missed 2 days, then I just eliminated them from the research. So the numbers would have been different one way or the other depending on the student and all that if they had been here. Faulty assessments. So like I said before, I gave them a story, 4 questions, pre and post the same exact thing. If I were to do it again, I would give more questions, because when they got a 4 on the pre-test, then they were pretty much, the only way they could go was down. So that was not good for me. I would like to show them growth, and especially because if, you know, it makes sense that the students that scored a 4 on the pre-test were sort of the stronger students. They would be more likely to show more growth through the instruction. So they pretty much were eliminated from the research overall, which didn't help, just to get a read on which one was more effective. I would also change the stories and make it a different story with the same main focus as those 4 book target phrases that I was talking about, but change the story a little bit, because a number of students, just as I handed them the test, were already like filling in answers because they just remembered the answers from the last story. They knew it was the same story, and they knew what the questions were, and they knew the same answers. So it wasn't the most accurate representation of did they really learn from the unit or not, which was frustrating. Another thing that was a challenge for me was, like I said, the Harkins method is a culmination of all these different things that I've learned over the years. And as I was teaching the Harkins method, it was hard for me to not use some of the tricks I learned from TPRS in that class, because I think they're good. I think it's a very solid method of instruction. And I wanted them to learn, even if it was through the Harkins method or not. I wanted them to learn. Obviously, we're all instructors, we're educators. We want our kids to learn, and it was, if I saw a way that I felt like they could understand it and practice it, I was slipping back into TPRS, and I had to keep reminding myself, like, just put it off for a little bit and we'll come back to it later. But that was a challenge. The word jacuzzi was something I never expected. It was a word in the story. The girl wanted to have an elephant in a jacuzzi. The stories get kind of silly, but for the pretest, a lot of students didn't know what jacuzzi meant, and that kind of just shut them down because it came up over and over again. They didn't, as soon as I said it after the test, in retrospect, I should have just told them it. It was an English word, just to get that going, but it came up over and over again, and they just felt like they shut down, and I could see some of them just going, well, I don't know what jacuzzi is, and that was a lot of what the zeros came from, in the pretest at least. And then a lack of serious approach by some students. They knew, I told them this was important to me, but they also knew that it was something that they just needed to do and kind of get done. And there were a number of students, especially on the pretest, I think, just put a big question mark, or I would ask them the questions in the hallway and just say, I don't know, and weren't really serious about the research, which is understandable. And I would imagine a problem with research at the elementary level for a lot of other people. So, where to go from here? I still go. Where to go from here? So unexpected results, like I said. I thought the TPRS was going to do better than the Harkins method. I still, despite the results of this research, am planning on using TPRS because I still believe that it's very effective. Now I pretty much completely moved away from the Harkins method, but this research showed me that there is still a lot of value in that, using the language to acquire the language. So I plan to kind of swing back into using a little bit more of the HMLA style of instruction and having students really work on that output a little bit more than the TPRS, the traditional TPRS would suggest. And that's all. Does anybody have any questions? There's supposed to be a 10-minute question and answer session, but if we don't have that many questions. Yes?
Which one did you enjoy doing more, or found more interesting? Or is it hard to tell because you were blending?
I think the TPRS for me is more interesting. The Harkins method, I mean, I've been here 5 years, and I basically did that for the 3.5 of it, so it kind of, I fell right back into it, and it came more easily, and again, I do think it's effective and it can work. But to me, I think the TPRS, just that circling, that constant repetition is challenging for me to keep them hooked in and engaged when they're not. It's a lot easier to say, okay, line yourselves up and talk to each other for a minute and then switch, a minute and switch, because they're more engaged, they're doing something, and they're actively participating more than just the listening. But I think part of my job with the TPRS, and this is what the books and the people say about it, is being engaging and being interesting enough so that even though they're not doing the speaking, they're willing to sit there and listen and they're interested in what you have to say. So I'd say TPRS for me is more challenging and interesting.
And I had another question.
Yeah.
I've heard sort of the Rossius method.
Mhm.
So where does that fall in terms of that? Because that,
Good. So the Rossius method is essentially instruction followed by drill, which is output. The Rossius method is like the opposite end of the spectrum from TPRS.
Huh.
TPRS says, give them input, 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 and eventually they'll start, it's like babies learning language, like that Stephen Crash in the Natural Approach. They'll start kind of babbling and just saying like a word here and there, and it's not gonna make any sense. And as they have that input and that kind of, you build a really solid base, and then eventually the output starts coming out. Whereas Rossius method is like, all right, here's 10 verbs, ready? Use them, and it's drill, and it's like, put you on the spot. Where that student satisfaction survey, like I had fun during this unit, people, after the first few things of Rossius drill are not walking out of there like I had fun, they're walking out of there fried. But that's what that method is all about, putting people on the spot, like you're in a real world setting where, you walk into a store, you're like, I need change for this $1, how do I ask for that or whatever. But it's to put you in that mindset of being like a heightened sense of anxiety, which forces you to give some output. So it falls in the completely opposite realm. But with the communicative learning, I mean, the idea is you're using it, so you're getting it. So it's getting it that way. Sorry.
I was just gonna ask, do you think the TPRS method results was just a result of being a new method for you in instruction? That, you said those results weren't as strong
Yeah.
as your old way. Your old way was your way that you've done for
Right.
so long that maybe as you use it more and more, you'll get better at it, so they'll.
Yeah, well, I really think that the assessments and the student population of TPRS class had a lot to do with the results. Yeah. I'd say that's what it was. Just, I think the other class took it a little more seriously, but I don't know. It's hard to say.
But the TPRS kids, that was new to them, but the other kids, it wasn't new to them, right?
Well, no, it was actually the Harkin method class was now like the new thing
Oh.
because I've been using TPRS for like about a year now.
Oh.
So I was going back to
Back to
something
the
else.
old-
The TPRS kids
Oh.
were used to the TPRS, but
Oh, I was thinking total opposite when you were explaining.
Oh, okay.
I was just assuming that.
okay. So no, I've been
Harkin's
using.
method was-
That's a good question. I've been using this TPRS or trying to use it more and more for like about a year now. I really just learned about it about this time last year. So really it was like reverting back to old, which they, a lot of the activities they were familiar with because they did them for 3 years, being fourth graders, in first, second, third grade, and then kind of just moved away from it.
Which of the two do you think you see more in student engagement?
Well, I would just put in like meaningful student engagement, like effective student engagement, and I think TPRS, as long as they're engaged, like I was saying, if I can keep them hooked in, I think that's more meaningful. When a big part of the Harkins method is line up in 2 rows, practice one of those target phrases, and then switch. You ask a question, they had a little house and they drew a picture and said, what kind of animal is in your house? And then switch. So they're using the language. But I really think that using TPRS, when they get more comprehensible input, as opposed to just these little chunks, when I'm up there telling like a whole story, I'm using conjunctions and, what's that word? Language, some pieces of the language, the way the language is formed and asking questions. And I think that's more meaningful to get more of the whole language as opposed to just those little chunks outside of a bigger context. So I mean, they're definitely engaged in the Harkin method. You can see them being engaged. But I believe, and TPRS people will tell you the same thing, that the comprehensible input is more meaningful for them. It's going to have a long-term better impact on their learning and acquiring language.
Because the only other thing I would have is that I think a lot of your results were a result of small sample size. And you had, it's hard for one person to teach in 2 different methodologies without those methodologies, having some interplay.
Mm-hmm.
So, that plays a part.
Absolutely. I mean, if I could be 2 separate people but with the same skill set and
Pure,
everything else, And then this is like the ideal setup
Right.
for what it, 2 kids, same socioeconomic, same, you know, as close as you can get.
Yeah.
Same schools, same time of day, you know, same days and weeks and all that. But, yeah, that was really hard for me to do that, to shift completely. But at the time too, I mean, I would rather do this over, 5 years.
Yeah.
Of having these 2 sets of kids, one from first grade all the way up, and, that's how they're scheduled, that's how their classes are set, I mean, an
Right, because
idea.
ultimately TPRS is after that kind of long-term.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's more of a long-term
Yeah.
feedback than,
Mhm. I mean, you can teach kids, a kid can memorize 50
Right.
vocab words and ace the test the next day, but in a week or a month, are they gonna be able to use any of those words? I don't think so, and I've seen that, not really, no. I mean, unless they're getting, I don't know, not really, 50
Exposure.
especially, but even like 8 is like, 7 plus or minus 2 is what they say that you can learn in a unit. And even then, without constant repetition and, like spiraling of it and referring back to it, it's really hard to do that. All right. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.